welcome to the Community Legacy and Wealth Succession Program. This topic is my new favorite topic to learn about. It's my new special interest, in part because we have friends who can make it accessible and interesting in DeeDee and Aiden. So in lieu of taking up more space, because there's really so much content to cover and so many points of intrigue, I'm not going to say more, but please join me in welcoming DeeDee and Aiden to share their information.
Thank you so much. For those of you that are standing, you go for it. And Lacey and some others brought in some more chairs. So when you're ready to sit down, please do grab a seat. We are so glad to have you all join us for this little teaser of a couple of different topics that Aiden and I spent quite a bit of time thinking about and talking about in communities across the regions that we serve. So my name is DeeDee LeMier. I am based out of our Brainerd Regional Office, and these days I call Park Rapids home, and I'm originally from north of Bemidji. So I am a Northwoods girl through and through. And I actually grew up coming to Ely every summer on kind of our annual Clark Griswold, new tide to our grumpy teenagers driving Highway 1 back in the day, where it's really hill and dale, real sketch, lots of grumpy people. But my favorite part of those trips was always when we were done and came back out of the woods and we got a hot shower and a great meal in Ely and got to enjoy the lovely downtown community. So it has been a real privilege for me that throughout my professional career, I've been able to have lots of excuses to come up to Ely for different things. And I've been able to bring my family here and make some great memories. So this is a picture of my little guy, Charlie, when he very first got to come to Ely. And now, I still think of it all the time when I go to his hockey games and practices, and I pull on my necklace to go sit in a very cold ice arena. So Ely is on my mind regularly. And then I'm joined by my colleague, Aiden. That's not his baby.
Hello, my name is Aiden. I'm based out of the Rochester office, actually, and I live in Northfield. But I was a brief resident up here. I lived here for 15 months. This was following a stint of 5 summers of being a seasonal worker up here. But now I try to make it up here at least once a year, hopefully twice for vacation.
Thank you. Now, I think it's also helpful for you, in case you haven't, in the other sessions that you've been in, but to have a little bit of an understanding of the framework that we bring to our work in community development. And so there's a lot of research and work all over the country around this kind of sector. And it's really this philosophy of spiraling up and having that you have different points of wealth and assets and things that really make your community what it is. But that over time you're building on it and you're revisiting those things over and over again. So just like these conversations earlier today, where there's some comments of, we've had some of these conversations in the past, and that's something that as community development professionals, we are expecting. That's part of this process. We're not thinking that we're going to be solving these questions. It just means we kind of rotate through them over time. So these different kinds of capitals and wealth that we're thinking about, cover a whole variety of areas. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about a human capital, social capital kinds of components, and also financial capital, but there are others. Things like the built capital of your downtown. Those are amazing assets for your community, as well as political capital, cultural capital, and natural capital. So we're just scratching the surface today, but just know that this is really kind of the framework that we bring into our work all the time. So, So often when I'm working with communities, they come to me and say, hey, how do we get more visitors? And these are rural communities. They're thinking about, we need to keep the lights on. And so that first point of consideration is with visitors. But what my research, my work really points to is that we actually need to be expanding the conversation and including workforce, visitors, and residents when we're making those plans in order to have truly sustainable communities and sustainable community development. And so these points of connection in this diagram, these are points of opportunity. They're the reason why there are restaurants to go to in a small town that may not exist if you didn't have those visitors. they may not be viable businesses. But they can also be those points of friction where when you're just trying to find a parking spot to meet your friend for coffee in July, it can be pretty frustrating. But it's really critical that we're including all three of these different audiences when we're planning for the future of our communities. So one of the big things in my work, when I hope that between some spares on the tables and some here, you wouldn't mind handing them out. You guys see some blank bingo cards on your table, please grab them, pass them around. So one of the things that comes up when I'm working with community on community economics and tourism development is that often, and I've heard it here today a whole bunch of times, people will say that they're not from here. Or I wasn't born here. Yes? Oh, I'm not from here, but I've lived here for 40 years. Okay. So, like, at what point are we that community?
Grandmother was born.
Yes. Oh, I could go in whole other thing. You'll have to have us come back for that. Does anybody else need a bingo card? Got it? Yes. Perfect. Don't be shy. There's no like meat raffle prize or anything like that to go with it. So I'm sorry.
Tomorrow, there's a meat raffle tomorrow at the Girls Bar for the Young Folks School.
I did not. There, so you could go pay for your prize. So what I wanted to do when we're thinking about, the different kinds of wealth that we have in our community, as I mentioned, there's social capital, there's human capital, there's all of this, but often we're kind of opting ourselves out. We're not even counting ourselves as part of that. So what I want to do here is just take a minute. There's markers on the table. You can grab a pen, make it colorful, do whatever you'd like. But I want to play a little kind of informal game of bingo. So every time I'm calling out one of these connections, you can mark it on your card. And what I'm really looking for is blackout bingo, which means you have all of them crossed. Well, we'll see how close we can get. Are you ready? Okay, you do get the free space. It's a free space. So what about those of you that have visited Ely to visit friends and family? You slept on somebody's couch. I don't know, here, maybe you put a tent up in their backyard. You stayed with your grandma. Any of those, you can cross that off. What about those of you that are local residents? You live in Ely, you live in the school district, you live in a neighboring township. And I should say too, I'm thinking of at any point in your whole life since you entered this world. For any of these. Okay, how many of you have been a tourist at some point?
Here.
Here.
Is it tourist defined as like someone that does stuff here but doesn't live here? What
I think of as like a tourist would be that you're probably like booking a hotel. You don't know anybody here.
You drive 10 miles an hour down Sheridan Street.
He said it, I didn't.
Not sure.
Yes. What about being a regional resident? And maybe at some point in your life, you've lived in a neighboring school district or across the county line. Maybe you live regionally now.
Me wins.
Yeah. What about those of you that like Aiden have been a summer worker? So that could be that you came up as a camp counselor, didn't know anybody else. It could also be that you moved home over the summer and lived with your parents to work. What about being a seasonal resident? And with my data and work, I think of it as that you stay for 30 or more nights in one place. So it's kind of a snowbird type of thing. And then you can mark down if you've been a year-round employee in the community.
What about volunteer?
Ooh,
Yeah.
sure. And then there's seasonal weekenders. Yes, so that may be folks that say like live in Minneapolis, but they're kind of back and forth throughout the summer months over long weekends. So. How did you do? Anybody have a full blackout? No? Okay, so there's 9 squares. Who has 8 squares filled in? Yes. Okay, hold on for that. Anybody else have 8 squares? Okay, how many of you have 7 squares? 6 squares? 5 squares? 4 squares? 3 squares? 2 squares? 1. Anybody only have a free space? I don't know why. Okay, so I'm gonna pick on both ends of that spectrum there, very briefly. If you guys wouldn't mind, just kind of sharing, like introducing yourself, but just sharing a little bit about your card, a couple highlights. Would you be Kate?
Who, me?
Yeah, you.
Sure.
Perfect.
Sure. I'm currently a local resident because I bought
Oh,
the
is your name?
Ely Speed Wash. I'm Carolee. But I could teach it. I bought it because I love coming to Ely and it became available and I only got to do those 2.
Perfect. Being a tourist and a local resident.
Right.
If only it was all so easy, right? And then Lucy?
I have worked summers here and have grew up being a tourist up here and coming up for weekends. And lived here for all summer months.
Awesome. So thank you all very much. You can give yourselves a little round of applause. You did it, even without 8 prizes. But really what this is just meant to show is that we're not just that, well, I've either been a lifetime resident or I've not. That even those of us that have been lifetime residents in our area, we have more variety to our story. There is more there. There's more to learn. And that's really important because when we're thinking about the different connections that we have within our community, it's really important that we're not just saying, okay, they're in that group or they're in that group, but that we're reminding ourselves and others to be open to the sheer variety of stories that are in any one group. And I think it's also really important too, because our communities and our relationships ebb and flow over time, but that doesn't mean that this community isn't still a heart home for us. And for many, many people with those connections to Ely, we won't, even know that that's what matters to them. And in my experience, like my mom taught early childhood, but she spent so much of the year with maps rolled out, planning the trip to the Boundary Waters, and that's what she was thinking about all the time. And we lived in the woods, and all she could think about was going to the woods. And so for Ely, when you're thinking about, planning for the future and kind of mapping out what's next, there's just so many people and connections and stories that you all have to be able to kind of dig into and that are just an incredible wealth for your community. So one of the questions, when we're thinking about this community wealth that Aiden will dig into some more, I think is like, what do we even mean or what comes to mind when we think of wealth? And I'm an 80s kid, and so to me, I totally think of Scrooge McDuck, like diving into his, coins and that whole like pirate's treasure trove. But really, like, I don't think you can swim in coins. I think this is really what wealth looks like. But I know for, many of us too, it can be like wealthy, like that's not me. And, I hate to break it to you, but even uber wealthy people do not think of themselves as wealthy. So that's kind of a given. And then there can even be that question of like, well, I don't think I even know anybody that's wealthy. What are you talking about? And that may or may not be the case, but I think what it really points to as well, though, that as Ben said, we don't know everyone in our community. And if we think about that heart home kind of group too, we really don't know all the people that are connected to our community. So there, according to like the most recent census data, there's like 3,200 people that live in Ely. And this is just one way of saying, okay, this is the size of your community, right? But we could, pull that apart, tease it apart, say, but what about the townships neighboring it? What about the school district size? All of those things. So this is just one number where we could say, oh, that's how big the community is. That's how much wealth we might be able to have, or the number of people we could look to. But as Ben kind of foreshadowed, there are some other, kind of numbers and ways of thinking about community. What kinds of numbers, I should steal his blank slide, but what kinds of numbers did you guys think of for like how many people would you have for meaningful contacts in your group? So another rule of thumb might be like holiday cards. Like how many people would be on that list? Anybody want to share a number? Shout it out. that you might have thought?
Less than that.
Less than
Yeah,
that?
it's
A lot less than that.
Yeah, were you thinking like 50 meaningful contacts? 20?
Yeah.
Okay, so the numbers, and this comes from anthropological research and looks at human civilization across time and, all different parts of the earth. And what it shows over and over again is this pattern of humans having about 15 good friends, 50 friends, 150 meaningful contacts, kind of that holiday card list, 500 acquaintances, and then 1,500 people you can recognize.
How was this data captured?
Not by me. But it's through, and I do have a link on there through the researcher Dunbar. And it's really, really fascinating to look at like ancient civilizations and also modern civilizations and where they've mapped it out, and different researchers in different parts of the world looking at different timetables come up with these same numbers. It's pretty amazing. So if we were to just say, okay, if there's 150 people, so, as Ben said, we don't know everybody in our community, even if we said there's 3,200 people. And then this research says we don't even recognize all of them. So we're probably thinking half the people in Ely are actually tourists, and they're your neighbors. So we're not even like recognizing or knowing ourselves as a community. And then, because we're at the University of Minnesota and we like numbers, we can actually crunch that. And there's some, math you can do, and thank goodness for being able to Google these kinds of calculators that show us if we kind of compare the size group and look at how many combinations of 150 are in Ely. It's this number. It hardly fits on the slide. I can't even say this number. So when we're saying that we don't know everybody, it's not only that we individually don't know everybody, but collectively we have so many versions of community that it would be impossible to get our arms around. And I say that because when we're talking with Aiden's numbers and things, I think sometimes it can just feel like so big to have these huge dollars, but really there's so many opportunities for us to connect with each other and to look at building our community. I don't know if this happened last time too. There's a bug in my slide. You know what? It probably broke it. It's that bad. Okay, so then I'm not even gonna let you rest with that giant one, because that's just residents. And as I told you at the very beginning, that I'm thinking about residents, workforce, and visitors. So using cell phone data, I can kind of get a snapshot of the number of visitors that have been to Ely in the last 12 months. This does not include young people, minors. It would not include people without a phone. It's over 300,000 visitors in the last 12 months. So is this your community? And what's incredible is we talked about with the bingo, there's so many different stories and connections and experiences you have individually had in your community. And these folks, they visited over 1 million different spots in your community. This is stops at gas stations, grocery stores, restaurants, attractions, lodging. They're having all of these different experiences in your community. So there are so many points of contact and points where people are making those connections with Ely and having those experiences. This is the same number of visits as Ellis Island in the last 12 months. So, and to my knowledge, Ellis Island does not have a hotel. I don't know that anybody would want to stay there. But this is just astronomical for having such, a small community. And this is just in 1 year. And we know people may come every year, but not always. And they're coming from across the country. So it's a little hard to see in the back, but there's all kinds of blue dots in Florida, California. It got a little cut off with a projector, but up in Washington, they're all over the place. And my data does not include international visitors. So this is automatically undercounted. And you had visitors from all 50 states and DC in the last 12 years. So if we want to say, okay, we're too small to do this. I don't know anybody that's wealthy. I don't know anybody, sorry. There are so many connections and there's so many people that show up in Ely. And when you think about it as well, here in Florida, you know, they're spending a lot of time and money to come to Ely. That's not like a quick day trip. And so part of the data that we could dive into in the future is, you know, around some of those kinds of myths and assumptions and things that we make about visitors to the community and where there can be some of those points of friction. How many of you, you know, have heard that like visitors are like wealthy? They're rich. Like, gosh, I wish I could go on vacation. Right? Well, there is a little truth to that shows up in the data where we do see that, and you'll have access to all of these slides, so don't worry about it, but this red on the right, there are higher numbers of visitors that are in this income bracket of over 150,000 for their household income. Like, so there is a little bit of truth to that. And if we look at the low end, your residents and your employees that work in Ely are they're overrepresented in that under 15,000. There are folks in both of those categories. So there's a little truth to some of those stories and those conversations that we have about our community and that we hear. Oops. But the highest, for across these different groups, the highest frequency is all in a shared group. That across visitors, residents, and your employees, the highest volume are between 50 and 100,000 for household income. So even if some of those existing conversations are kind of wanting to just write it off, yeah, but they're different than us. There's a whole lot of similarity. And so planning for these different audiences over time doesn't mean that you're planning for somebody that's foreign to yourself or your experience. You may actually have a whole lot in common. And so with that income piece, that's just a little teaser to it. We can sure dig in with further conversations, but I want to hand it off to Aiden. Well, I guess I can do this one, but the big legacy considerations that I want you to be thinking about really is that Ely is bigger than just the circle that you have and that group of friends or close contacts. And that each of these audiences is going to have different connections, different needs, but there's also a whole lot in common. And that you need those multiple perspectives and even begin to get your arms around whose story are you telling, who is your community as you're making those plans and visions for the future.
Thank you. So we're now into the wealth succession portion of this presentation, and just a few heads up. This is normally a 30-minute to an hour presentation, so I would love to come back to give a full demonstration of this presentation. It does a lot of the data is also found in the report that I handed out, which are free for all counties and communities in Minnesota. The other thing, I am not an estate planner. I'm not a tax expert. I'm just a guy who's good at looking at spreadsheets. So take that when you're looking at these numbers. So first of all, income does not equal wealth. Income is one of the ways you create wealth or financial wealth. But income is like the stream that fills the bathtub. It's the faucet that fills the bathtub. And then consumption is the drain leading out of the bathtub of wealth. But how is wealth forecasted? How do I forecast this? Well, I combine household wealth, closely held business wealth, and then I take population projections and do some math. To break down this household wealth and this business wealth a bit more, household wealth is savings, checking and investment accounts, life insurance, residential real estate and homes, retirement accounts. It is also business wealth. It is closely held farm and business assets and agricultural real estate. All this wealth is also counted where it's owned. So anyone who owns a cabin or a second home but lives somewhere else in a different county, that wealth is not counted in this. It is just wealth that is owned by people here. So I have both St. Louis County, but then Lake County is a bit more analogous to this region. So I'll do St. Louis County as well as Lake County. But in St. Louis County, there's $81.9 billion worth of household wealth. $3.1 billion is going to pass from one generation to the next in 10 years. And in Lake County, there's $6.3 billion worth of household wealth, with $295 million passing from one generation to the next in just 10 years. So what I do is I take 5% of that, because there's now a website called minnesotastateshare.org, which is a toolbox of how to talk about this. And there's a campaign. Again, this is about donations. And so it is, we take 5%. So if I take 5% of that, that's where a lot of these numbers are coming from. But first we have to break it down a little bit more. So let's look at the populations. So population over time and the projected future show a similar pattern in both St. Louis County and Lake County. And so it's probably somewhat similar for the region around Ely. And it shows, yes, it's declining, but that's, as Ben stated, it is also due to shrinking household sizes. And so if the number of households stay the same and you have shrinking household sizes, you have a decreasing population, but it's also fairly stable. So that's a positive. Stable is good. But what we're more focused on is this population distribution. So as you can see, and it's cut off on the left side, but in 2040, there is a bump for the oldest population category. That is the boomer mouse moving through the population snake. And you can see it again, as Ben mentioned, in 2065, and that is the millennial bump. So when my analysis is over for 10 years, it's about a 10-year projection. So that means Ely has about 5 years to make a 10-year plan. Best time for as the saying goes, the best time for planting a tree was yesterday. The second best time is right now. So this is about giving some data to support nonprofits, community foundations, charities in their planning for the next couple of years. This is the amount of wealth that could be available. And here's what a plan may look like. What could a 10-year plan look like? So a community member donates $100 to spaghetti fundraisers annually, and but if their estate donates $2,500, a community foundation, it would create $100 of annual donations forever. So this is about creating a legacy, creating a future, and helping community thrive for generations to come. So if we look at the actual numbers, again, I'm a spreadsheet guy, so I apologize. But this is using a 7% return on investment. And I've heard that's a bit low. It's usually around 8 or 9% for a community foundation or a nonprofit for their endowment. But I do conservative estimates because I do not want to overpromise. And this also assumes a 4.3% give back. So 4.3% of their endowment is used for grant making every year. So in total for Lake County, 5% of that $295 million worth of transfer of wealth over 10 years, so this is 10 years into the future already, is a beginning principal of $14.8 million. So in the 20 years following this initial 10-year donation period, without a single additional dollar donated, this would allow for grant making of $17.6 million. Again, without a single additional dollar donated. And this would increase that principal but to $25.8 million. This is all in 2025 dollars. So this assumes some between 1.5% and 3% interest or inflation rate. So this is in 2025 dollars. So what this shows is not only does a community like Ely, like an area around Ely, have wealth, but there is a possibility and potential to create nonprofits and to create giving campaigns for nonprofits, charities, and community foundations in this region that will last generations. That's what this is about. This is a two-pronged approach. So one is talking to the nonprofits, and a lot of you are members, to community foundations. But this is also about informing the members of the community. So you have a top-down and a community-led approach. This is, again, this is about donations, and it's about creating a legacy and a future that for a community that you all love. That's why you're here. It's because you love Ely enough to spend half a day just talking about this. So why not give back? Why not take advantage of this and help create a legacy for Ely where people can enjoy what you love about Ely for generations to come? Oh, I skipped over this by just talking. So it's all for review and next steps. There's community capitals. Everything is, this conversation has already been had. It's all about building up. It's all about building off of what previous conversations have been about, what previous efforts have been about. And then what should be included in future conversations. Share what you've heard. Stay in touch. Again, I have a much longer presentation on this that it has a lot more data, so just a warning, but I would love to talk about that and give that to the community. So thank you. And feel free to reach out to either of us about any of the things you've heard today.
We have any questions? I think we have a few minutes for questions.
Yep.
Look at us go. Yeah. It depends about being pretty split, but what kinds of questions do you have, or what's on your mind? Yes.
The idea of a community endowment is unique to me. I'm not super familiar with that idea, and I'm sure it's been implemented in other small towns. Is that something that's usually run by a private organization, or is that incorporated more into like the city governance? Manage that way?
So I can talk about, so again, I'm from southeastern Minnesota, and it is usually a private organization or initiative foundation. So what happens in southeastern Minnesota is there's the Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation, which has the capabilities to work with communities to create their own funds. And then what they do is they put all the funds together, keeping track of the money that each fund has in order to get better return on investment for all the communities. And so I think there's an initiative foundation up here.
There's an Ely Community Foundation. There's a variety of yes.
I'm the chair of the Ely Community Foundation.
There we go.
Your service. Yes.
So you've been in action.
Yes. And there are other foundations that serve different interests and entities right here in Ely as well. So this doesn't necessarily mean create brand new organizations. And as you said, it doesn't even just have to be something where it's all going to one organization.
This is about money. So the idea is again, we're gonna have to talk about death, but when people pass away, a lot of their money leaves a community because it goes to kids or other family members or other loved ones who are no longer within the community. That money, and the idea is at that point, why not donate 5% of that so it can stay within the community and help grow and maintain a community that the people love. And so it's yes, money's leaving it, but why not just have some money stay here?
How is the money used, for in Southeastern, this endowment, I guess and I don't know terminology, but how is that used in the sense of people pulling out? Does it go back to nonprofits, or?
It goes to the nonprofit that created the endowment, and that is not my area of expertise. That would be for communities to decide how that money is being used.
area doing anything, foundation doing anything like this, what they're talking about, the 5% endowment or?
Well, what they're talking about is a theory of 5%.
Mhm.
You can do 10%, you can do 15%.
And what this,
Grants are how we pass through the money.
Oh, I see, okay.
yeah, and it's my, the column that I was pointing out is labeled grant making, so it's usually grants. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you for having us, and it's fantastic being here.